One city even warning residents only use the water they have to sustain life.
I don't know what to do.
Shower was hot and I got about 10 jackets on and I don't think I'm gonna make it no more. So who got heat at their house, bro? I'm coming over.
Too many of you were shivering in your own homes. No power, no heat, no water. You deserve answers. You will get those answers.
Without electricity, it's not just comfort that disappears. It's safety, health, and sometimes life itself that are at stake. In February 2021, a polar vortex struck Texas, a massive spiral of freezing air from the North Pole. It happens regularly in winter across the American Midwest, but in 2021, it was of cataclysmic intensity, and Texas was not ready.
What the f*** is this?
And when you factor in the wind, this is where things get really brutal. 30 to 40 degree below zero readings across the Great Plains, with numbers for us in the single digits and teens by Tuesday morning.
Texas was hit with a massive winter storm. Temperatures dropped below freezing for days. Millions lost power and water, and hundreds died.
Between 10 and 15 million people were left without electricity. It was as if New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago had been plunged into darkness in an instant.
You could see pictures, some of the pictures people forget, like the inside of people's homes were frozen, like pipes were busted, and you could see ice waterfalls coming down their walls, through their ceiling, massive icicles inside their home, right? So it's not just a matter of minor inconvenience, it's a matter of survival. And it was crazy.
Pipes freeze and burst, food supplies spoil, life-saving medical devices stop working. Over 200 people died of hypothermia in this disaster, and it raised one terrible question. What if the cold was not the only cause of this blackout?
To better understand what happened, we must first understand how the electrical grid works in the United States. The Eastern Interconnection links the Atlantic coast states all the way to the Midwest, while the Western Interconnection covers the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. These two distinct grids are partially interconnected, allowing them to share electricity during peak consumption or unexpected events.
This organization allows interconnected states outside Texas to support each other in case of supply shortage. They can transfer electricity quickly, limiting the risk of a massive blackout.
Like Texas, Oklahoma was hit by Winter Storm Uri. But unlike its neighbor, it is part of an interconnected grid. In case of need, it can receive electricity from neighboring states.
Texas has always prized its independence. That is why it built a separate grid. But this autonomy comes at a cost. In times of crisis, the Lone Star State can only rely on itself. The storm Uri revealed that the Texas grid was not up to the task when it comes to major natural climate disasters. When part of the grid collapses, there is no safety net. The problem with extreme cold is that power plants come under severe strain, and at the same time, every resident pushes their heating to the max. That is the moment when consumption explodes on the grid and production collapses at the same time.
In a city, several sources of electricity are necessary: nuclear power plants, gas plants, and renewable energy. Once produced, electricity is injected into the grid, where it flows through high-voltage lines. Then it is distributed to industrial areas, businesses, public infrastructure, and homes. Production on one side, consumption on the other. Everything depends on their balance. If one exceeds the other, the system becomes unstable, and the risk of a total blackout becomes real.
The function of the grid operator, ERCOT in this case, is to maintain balance across the grid. And when that balance cannot be maintained, they need to modify either the generation side or the load side of the equation. In this case, because generators were not able to produce the energy, they had to reduce the power going to load, and therefore resulting in blackouts.
On February 15th, 2021, at 1:23 a.m., the Texas electrical grid reaches its highest emergency alert level. To prevent a total collapse, 1,000 megawatts of consumption are cut, the equivalent of nearly 1 million households instantly plunged into darkness. At that moment, more than 35,000 megawatts of generation capacity are already offline. As generation collapses, demand keeps rising. At that moment, one figure becomes crucial: the grid frequency. It must remain fixed at 60 hertz. But the margin of error is razor thin, barely 1% of deviation, and the entire system begins to collapse. Below 59.4 hertz, the grid enters the red zone. And if the drop continues, a blackout becomes inevitable. At that moment, every passing second puts the lives of millions of people at stake. At 1:41 a.m., an additional 1,418 megawatts are lost. At 1:43, 248 megawatts go offline. At 1:44, another 329 drop offline. At 1:46, an additional 1,000 megawatts of load shedding are ordered. But the drop doesn't stop. 606 megawatts fall at 1:48. 688 at 1:49. The critical threshold is getting closer. 511 at 1:50. The grid frequency drops below 59.4 hertz. The red zone has been crossed. A few more minutes like this, and the system begins to disintegrate. Texas is now only minutes away from a total collapse. At 1:51, 3,000 are cut in a single order. A massive shock to save the system. The equivalent of 3 million households plunged into darkness. At 1:55, an additional 3,500 are ordered. The grid pulls back from the red zone. Balance slowly returns.
You know, looking around and saying, "Oh man, what could we have done better to prepare for this nuclear bomb?" You can't. You know, our nuclear plant froze and went offline. It's inconceivable. You know, it's insane. So at some point, like, and I think what's a lot of people don't understand is they're looking who was at fault, who was to blame, but they have no idea how close we were to a true catastrophe. We almost lost the grid in Texas for months. We were minutes away from a total blackout.
Either you deliberately plunge 10 to 15 million people into darkness, knowing deaths will follow, or the entire state loses power moments later, 30 million Texans, and the damage to the grid increases dramatically. For the Uri crisis, we are talking about $80 to $130 billion in damages.
Demand response has become, a huge part of our daily life. Before Uri, there was a lot of people that didn't know what demand response meant. The truth of the matter is, I think that after Uri, it was a wake-up call. It was a real big wake-up call for the state of Texas, for all of the political people, even for our governor, who I think Governor Abbott does a great job. but it was a wake-up call to understand, how do we make sure, what can we do that this doesn't happen again? We can't stop a 100-year storm from coming.
Many of you are angry, and you have a right to be. I'm angry too. At a time when essential services were needed the most, the system broke. You deserve answers. You will get those answers. I am already working with the legislature on reforms to add more power to the grid and to ensure that we never run out of power again.
Faced with the crisis, the state had to act fast. When the grid is overwhelmed, increasing production becomes an obvious necessity. But at what cost?
This is the traditional approach to securing a power grid supply. We add generation capacity that is only used to manage grid crises. But the major issue is that this requires massive investment. More than $15 billion in Texas's case at the time.
One man is ready to put $8.8 billion on the table to save Texas. Ryan Bassett.
One of the wealthiest men in the world and his company, you may have heard about, have a deal for Texas. They're offering one anyway to fix the energy grid. If Texas buys it, you might call it blackout insurance. $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion. It's a name that opened doors and turns heads here in Texas. Warren Buffett.
Yeah, he came in with an $8 billion proposal to build 10 power plants around the state that would come on only when the lights go out. They would be there for emergency use.
So, and it's $8 billion of his dollars. He is not asking Texas to front that money.
Right, but he is asking Texas to allow him to charge electric ratepayers to build those plants.
Let's put ourselves back in context, because this is an incredible story. Warren Buffett, one of the most powerful men in the world, offers you a plan. Inject billions to stabilize the grid in exchange for control over part of Texas's electrical infrastructure. How do you say no? And yet, that is exactly what happened. No thank you. We have another idea. We will go it alone and use this as an opportunity to gain competitiveness while securing the grid.
Wait, why on earth would Texans say no to the Oracle of Omaha?
Because they don't want to pay more.
And honestly, they're right. Look, if Texas can't find real solutions, at some point they've got to take responsibility.
And yes, at that moment, Texas surprised the entire world.
Elon Musk has stated that Berkshire Hathaway's energy proposal for Texas, spending more than $9 billion for new generating capacity, is wrong.
And if anybody can do it faster, they can do it cheaper, whatever. That's terrific. But they should have something to lose, though, if they don't do it.
Texas chose to say no to Warren Buffett, not only because of the cost, but also because it challenged the independence of a grid that operates outside the federal system. Here, energy is managed locally, without any outside interference. An independent, deregulated grid, unique in its kind. Accepting would have meant giving up that model, a decision contrary to everything Texas stands for. As the state rejects Warren Buffett's plan, another voice begins to emerge. At ERCOT, the state's grid operator, they turn to someone who knows the system better than anyone, a former executive, a man who had been retired for years. And yet, he is the one who will redefine the energy future of Texas. Brad Jones.
ERCOT's board of directors named an interim president and CEO today, and the name is a familiar one. Brad Jones.
ERCOT's interim CEO, Brad Jones.
We'll have the privilege of sitting down with Mr. Brad Jones.
Will he be up to the task?
My goal, the reason why I'm here, is to reestablish that trust that you've all had in ERCOT in the past. To reestablish the organization, to stabilize it, to improve communications, to improve reliability, and to improve the overall coordination between our organization and the rest of the state entities. So that's my goal. Once I accomplish that, I'll be gone. All right, I was retired before this. I do want to return to retirement.
I think Brad Jones, he had a more holistic point of view that involved, a lot of different approaches, what he would consider like a mix of everything to help solve the problem. And that would involve a mix of generation resources, but also a mix of different types of load, including large flexible load. to help with generally flexibility for those times of scarcity.
So I think there were a lot of measures taking place, but for the most part, I believe what we all realized is oil and gas companies had been the background, the backbone of the state of Texas. They were the largest power users in the state, and they created most of the revenue. What we began to figure out is oil and gas companies don't make money unless oil is coming out of the ground. For oil and gas to come out of the ground, it takes electricity.
Faced with a crisis, electricity becomes a scarce resource. Households consume more than the grid can supply, and power plants fail one after another. The price of electricity explodes, jumping from $30 per megawatt hour to $9,000.
In the ERCOT market of Texas, there's essentially three markets that you can, or three types of power products that you can buy. The first one is a fixed block of energy. So it's basically buying a block of power, let's say 10 megawatts, for a certain time and volume at a set price. The other type of market is what's called the real-time market in Texas. So the real-time market is kind of like a spot market where you kind of give and take. And every 15 minutes, natural gas prices settle in Texas, and so the real-time market settles with natural gas prices. So every 15 minutes, the price of the real-time market in Texas changes. So, during Winter Storm Uri, literally the real-time market hit its cap at $9,000 a kilowatt hour for 72 hours straight. So to buy spot power during that storm was literally a historic rate for that time period that it was frozen out. The other type of market that you can buy power in is what's called the day-ahead market. And the day-ahead market is basically like a bid and ask type situation. So, but mainly the two types of market that most people participate in Texas is the fixed market, buying a block of energy, and then the real-time market in Texas where it settles every 15 minutes.
At this stage, one thing becomes obvious. What the grid lacks is electricity. While others would have bet on more production, Brad Jones looks elsewhere. He turns to consumption. Is there an actor capable of absorbing massive amounts of electricity, then cutting it all off instantly without compromising its operations? That ideal consumer exists. It had been there all along. Bitcoin.
The greatest value to Bitcoin is that they have the flexibility to turn off their total consumption on a moment's notice. That value means that unlike any other industry, whether it's even another data center that has to stay up all the time, that has customers like Amazon or something like that, those companies have to stay up, have to have a high level of capability, and they're always consuming. For Bitcoin, it does what we have been looking for at ERCOT for years and years. It creates a dynamic load.
There. That day, it's fair to say that Brad Jones perfectly embodied the pioneering and fighting spirit of Texas.
And let me say to all of crypto and all of Bitcoin, come to Texas. Texas is the oasis for Bitcoin.
When we think of Bitcoin, we often imagine something virtual, intangible. But in reality, its production relies on very real infrastructure. Much like gold, it takes work to extract a Bitcoin. Except here, there are no pickaxes or underground tunnels. To obtain a Bitcoin, machines must continuously solve extremely complex mathematical equations. This process is called mining.
Power farms have emerged as the perfect solution. These facilities consume enormous amounts of electricity, but have the ability to disconnect from the grid in under 5 minutes. An ideal consumer, one that maximizes the utilization rate of power plants when capacity is available on the grid, and ultimately helps drive down energy prices for every consumer.
When a moment occurs, like a Uri or a storm or a problem, and the grid is being pressured, in other words, there's not enough power, there are companies that are willing to say, I don't need power today, I can do without it, and I'll allow my power to go back to the grid, and for that, there are ways through ERCOT they get paid. If somebody gives something up, they need to make money.
To build a power farm, the first requirement is a strategic location directly connected to a nearby electrical substation. This substation provides the necessary energy by converting high voltage lines to a voltage suitable for local distribution. The site is then prepared to accommodate the installations. Concrete foundations are poured to support the weight of the structures. Once the foundations are ready, containers are positioned using cranes according to a plan that optimizes power supply, ventilation, and technical access. Transformers are also installed to handle the final conversion step before distribution to the modules. Inside each container, racks hold hundreds of machines specialized in intensive computing. Once operational, these containers become true computing units capable of continuously processing enormous volumes of data.
The site must meet two constraints. It must be close to a distribution node on the grid, what we call a substation. And at the same time, that substation must have available power 95% of the time throughout the year. This availability of excess megawatts depends on local electricity production capacity. Today, this computing power is now being used to secure the Bitcoin blockchain. It is important to understand that from our perspective, Bitcoin is simply data produced from electrical energy and given value on the internet. Keep in mind that bringing new megawatts online is expensive, and yet with this power farm system, you discover that perhaps 10 or even 20% of the electrical power on the existing grid is sitting unused 95% of the time. Held in reserve for emergencies, yes, but now you are able to monetize it. Thousands of megawatts already operational, costing nothing, just waiting to be put back to work immediately. When you realize the scale of this potential, you feel like you've just found a gold mine right beneath your feet.
At Data Factory, we are an infrastructure company on the electrical grid. The Bitcoin mining industry is a stepping stone, a gateway for us, which allows us to acquire megawatts with a very low investment and to manage energy. But the more we grow, the more we will develop other sources of flexible energy consumption. In the medium term, we expect a fraction of high-performance computing production. Everything revolving around AI, to put it simply. Around AI, evolving. And the documentary was supposed to end there. We only intended to explain how power farms help balance electrical grids. The conclusion was meant to be that in the future, this model would allow every grid in the world to be balanced. But the future has accelerated, and we need to talk about it.
We know that the rarity of the energy is going to be problematic across the world.
Anytime you touch an icon on your phone, anytime you book a flight, or anytime you watch a movie at night, you're using a data center.
Stargate, so put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure.
Infrastructure need for the world is just going to be exponentially growing. Right.
Did you ever think we'd get to this point where power has now become really the hottest commodity in the world?
It is the same as you are suddenly bringing water to a desert in the middle of the Sahara.